I knew the moment was coming the second Gavin Whitcomb strutted into the Monday leadership meeting like he owned the air in the room. He was wearing his late father's Rolex. An ill-fitting suit that probably cost more than my first car. And that signature smirk? The kind that belongs to someone who's never had to earn a thing in his life. He didn't bother with greetings. No good morning. No nods. He just planted himself at the head of the table like a reality show Caesar. Flipping through a clipboard as if we were items on a clearance list. Realignment. He called it. Strategic simplification. His voice had the oily confidence of someone who thinks a PowerPoint is a personality. When he read the first name out loud, the room stiffened. By the third, someone coughed. I didn't need to hear the fourth. I knew mine was coming. And then it did. Stephanie Lowell, SVP Finance. No eye contact. No explanation. No acknowledgement of my 18 years building the very systems he'd been bragging about optimizing. Just a name on a clipboard. A flick of the pen. A formality. Effective immediately. He added, barely above a mumble. Janice from payroll dropped her pen. Someone else muttered, wait. What? But me, I didn't blink. I stood, smoothed the front of my blazer, and said 5 words I'd been saving for the right moment. For someone exactly like him. Thank you for your clarity. Then I picked up my succulent from the window ledge, the one I rescued from near death during our third merger, and reached into my desk drawer for the photo of my dog wearing sunglasses that had seen me through 2 embezzlement cases. 1 office flood, and a CFO who thought budget was a suggestion. I didn't slam anything. I didn't curse. I didn't cry. But don't mistake silence for surrender, because while Gavin was still working on his smug exit script, I was already flipping through a different kind of file. Not on paper, but in my head. Clause 12c. Buried deep in my contract. Silent. Binding. Sharp. You don't last in corporate finance for nearly 2 decades without preparing for the moment someone with too much ego and too little insight decides you're disposable. And you sure as hell don't survive it gracefully unless you've got safeguards. Tripwires. Leverage. So I walked out. Not because I had no fight left, but because my fight didn't need to be loud. It needed to be smart. Precise. Surgical. The thing about being underestimated is that it buys you time. Space. Freedom to move beneath the radar while they think you're licking your wounds. They think I left quietly. What they didn't know is that I walked out holding the match. And Gavin, he just handed me the gasoline. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I didn't even vent to a friend. Instead, I went home. The first thing I did was change. I swapped my blazer for a soft cardigan that smelled like dryer sheets and detachment. Then I made a cup of chamomile tea, heavy on the whiskey. For the antioxidants, of course, and let the steam hit my face while I stood in the middle of my kitchen. Perfectly still. Not still like frozen. Still like loaded. I walked to the laundry room, opened the cabinet under the sink, and reached for the small fireproof safe I'd tucked there years ago. Behind a dusty bottle of fabric softener and a pack of half-melted tea light candles. The code clicked under my fingers like muscle memory. Inside was only one thing, a slim manila folder. My original employment contract, signed 5 years ago by Elena Whitcomb. The Iron Widow behind the empire, Gavin's mother, the real mind behind the brand, when her husband passed. She didn't grieve publicly. She consolidated power, retired officially. But make no mistake, nothing moved at Whitcomb without her knowing. And I'd been smart enough to know that I would never work under a family-run corporation without a legal exit plan. I flipped through the pages slowly. Deliberately. The language was dry. Cold. Like most corporate contracts. Until I reached the one clause that mattered. Clause 12c. In the event of termination without documented cause, The company shall immediately initiate an independent third-party forensic audit of all financial activities and expenditures conducted within the previous 24 months. Mandatory. Non-negotiable. I'd fought for that clause in a backroom negotiation after saving the company from a 7-figure logistics scandal in Brazil. Elena had offered me a bonus. I countered with something much more valuable, a trigger hidden in plain sight. She'd raised an eyebrow. I didn't blink. She signed. I'd only read it a few times since then. Enough to remember it existed. Not enough to live in it. Until now. I closed the folder and placed it carefully on the kitchen counter. Next to the tea I hadn't touched. I stared at it like it was a sleeping animal. Beautiful. Quiet. And deadly when provoked. This wasn't rage. This wasn't even revenge. This was architecture. A system built to activate when arrogance overtook competence, when someone like Gavin thought he could erase me without consequence. When a clipboard and a smirk felt more powerful than 18 years of institutional memory, they didn't see it coming because they'd never imagined I had teeth. They thought I was just another finance exec who'd age out quietly. They thought wrong. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to plead. I had paperwork. I took a long sip of my tea. Smooth. Bitter. Satisfying. And opened my laptop. I pulled up the termination email. With its curt subject line, staff reduction, immediate. No personalization. No thank you. Just a digital slap in Times New Roman. I downloaded the attachment as a PDF. Composed a new message to Legacy. Audit at Whitcomb Enterprises. Com. And hit send. No body text. No explanation. Clause 12C would do the talking. Then I powered off my laptop. Poured myself another drink. Something a little harsher. And sat down by the window as the evening settled around me. The company had made a mistake. They thought they'd fired a name on a spreadsheet. What they'd actually done was pull the pin on the grenade. There's a certain kind of silence that comes just before impact. Not the hollow kind. The charged kind. The kind that hums low in the chest. Like the moment before lightning strikes. When the air goes heavy, but no one around you notices the sky has already turned. That's where I lived. For the next 12 hours. After I sent the email to legacy.audit@whitcombeenterprises.com, I didn't check for a reply. I didn't add a subject line. No explanation. No signature. Just the attachment. The same termination letter Gavin had passed around like a dinner menu. Now. It was a detonator. I closed my laptop with the calm of someone who didn't need to chase closure. Because the contract was already in motion. I hadn't sent a message. I'd triggered a mechanism. Clause 12C wasn't just words buried in fine print. It was designed to activate itself. Silently. Automatically. New questions asked. I poured myself a second drink. Something sharp and unforgiving. And sat by the window. Watching the city settle into dusk. Nothing looked different. Traffic lights blinked. Neighbors walked their dogs. Someone 2 buildings over burned toast. But deep inside Whitcomb headquarters, I knew the balance had shifted. Not dramatically. Not yet. But just enough for the first domino to lean. Maybe some mid-level legal associate would see the incoming audit flag and hesitate. Maybe someone from compliance would check the digital signature and wonder why the system suddenly pulled a 5-year-old clause out of archive. Or maybe, just maybe, the external audit firm had already opened the file and started reading. That's the thing about precision strikes. They don't arrive with explosions. They arrive quietly. Ask a question, then a second one. Then silence. At exactly 10:17 in the evening, somewhere inside a secure inbox, a red dot began to blink. Not one person in that building knew what it meant. But they would. Soon. Because this wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't revenge theater. This was engineering. The kind that starts with numbers and ends with names. And Gavin, he was probably still sitting in his overpriced leather chair. sipping something imported, congratulating himself on a clean break. But by morning, someone would whisper. By afternoon, someone else would panic. And by the end of the week, the question wouldn't be, why was I fired? It would be, why didn't anyone stop her? I didn't want chaos. I wanted truth. And the truth, when buried long enough, doesn't scream. It seeps into files, into whispers, into boardrooms. They thought I was gone, but I was already inside the system. Not as a name on a payroll, but as a clause in the foundation. They tried to erase me with a clipboard. But what they really did was light the fuse I left behind. And the thing about quiet detonation is this: the building doesn't shake. Not yet. But it will. It started with 4 people. Not lovers. Not board members. Auditors. They walked through the glass doors of Whitcomb headquarters on a foggy Wednesday morning. 3 men in dark suits and 1 woman with a jawline sharp enough to slice drywall. They carried no fanfare. No security detail. No press. Just quiet authority and matching credentials signed years ago by one name. Elena Whitcomb. They didn't need appointments. They didn't ask to speak to anyone. They handed over a document stamped with legacy compliance access. And the receptionist, bless her, barely out of college, blinked twice before calling upstairs. By then, it was already too late to contain it. Up on the executive floor, Gavin was mid-sentence. Something about synergy and agile transformation. He was holding a mimosa. Of course he was. It was a leadership brunch. After all, one of those tone-deaf gatherings where buzzwords flow faster than strategy. A whisper came in from his assistant. Lips close to his ear. He frowned. Laughed. Probably. Waved it off. Compliance. He might have said. Routine stuff. Nothing serious. But his voice cracked. And Janice from payroll, who had a talent for sensing panic, texted me almost instantly. Girl. Auditors. Your boy just spilled his mimosa. I smiled. Just a little. Not because it was funny. Because it was predictable. That's the thing about people like Gavin. They assume power protects them. But power, without discipline, is just an open door. And mine had just walked through it. By mid-morning, the question began. The audit team requested access to 2 years' worth of executive credit card records. They flagged something almost immediately. A discretionary innovation fund Gavin had treated like monopoly money. Receipts were missing. Vendors had no web presence. Transactions led to a shell corporation registered to a post office box in Nevada. Sky Forge Partners. I'd flagged it months ago. Gavin had brushed it off. Called it synergy development. The kind of phrase you use when you're trying to buy a Tesla with investor money. But now, every transaction I had once quietly questioned was screaming. Luxury retreats labeled as emotional alignment, 6-figure payments for branding consultations that included goat, yoga, a supposed leadership summit booked just 3 weeks after mass layoffs, held at a high-end spa with a tequila tasting and no recorded agenda. All of it was back. I didn't have to raise my voice. I didn't even have to be there. Because this wasn't about me anymore. It was about the system I had quietly, carefully wired to react exactly like this, like an immune response. Stephanie Lovell. Terminated without cause. Clause 12C activated. Clause 12C activated. Full audit. No warning. Full audit. The past begins to surface. No matter how much perfume you spray on it. Rot has a way of climbing up through the floorboards. And Gavin, he wasn't prepared for exposure. He had spent years coding everything in buzzwords and charm, but buzzwords don't survive forensic accounting. Charm doesn't hold up under data cross-checks, and within hours, he would learn that the audit team was not just hunting numbers. They were hunting patterns, connections, lies buried just deep enough to feel safe. until someone like me remembered where they were. I said nothing. I just sat at home, crossed my legs, poured another drink, and let the system do what it was built to do. Because I wasn't the smoke, I was the spark, and the fire had officially begun. It wasn't until late Thursday that I found out who was leading the audit team. Dominic Crane. The name hit like a soft bell in the back of my mind. Familiar. Not recent. And then it clicked. My intern. From over a decade ago. 2011. He was fresh out of college. All bright eyes and too much hair. Smart. But raw. I was already seasoned. Sharp-edged. Known in the finance department for my obsessive attention to detail and my absolute intolerance for sloppiness. He once cried in the break room after I made him redo an entire monthly report because the font sizes in the spreadsheet headers weren't consistent. Not the numbers. The formatting. I stood over his desk and said, calmly, but firmly, in this field, Dominic, the numbers have to be cleaner than your soul. I didn't mean it to be cruel. I meant it as survival advice. Because in finance, you don't get second chances with mistakes. One misplaced decimal, and someone loses a house. One unchecked expensee. And the rot starts spreading. He learned. Fast. By the time his internship ended. He wasn't just better. He was sharp. Focused. And more importantly, he had learned the one rule I always lived by. Trust the data. The rest is noise. Now. More than a decade later. He was walking the same halls I used to run. But not as an intern. He was leading the investigation. Dominic Crane. Senior Forensic Auditor. One of the youngest to ever earn partner track at Willoughby & Sloan. A firm you don't even get interviewed at unless you're carrying a triple-locked briefcase of credentials. A blurry photo showed up in my messages. Someone from the inside. Probably Janice again. Dominic. Walking into the building with a messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a face that hadn't forgotten a thing. He wasn't smiling. That was when I realized something else. He wasn't here for me, but he was built by me. The way he held his files. The way he asked for direct access instead of requesting summaries. The way he walked. Not slow. Not rushed. Just methodical. As if the numbers were already whispering, and he just needed to get close enough to hear them. That was training. That was legacy. That was poetic justice wrapped in an Excel formula. And the timing flawless. I didn't gloat. Didn't text him. Didn't send a cryptic message or offer help. He didn't need it, because I knew exactly how he'd approach it. Start with the discretionary accounts. Cross-reference vendor registrations with the federal database. Trace all travel reimbursements against publicly available flight manifests. Filter everything with a 2-year scope. Then tag anything with more than one layer of ownership. It would look like a normal audit from the outside. But from the inside, it would feel like a scalpel. And Gavin, he had no idea that the quiet kid he once walked past in the hallways, the one who used to fetch coffee and refill toner, now had access to every executive transaction he'd ever tried to bury. I closed the message. Let the moment settle. I had always believed that if you teach someone how to look closely, they'll eventually see what others miss. Now, the student had returned. Not for revenge. For the truth. And this time, he wasn't crying over formatting. He was holding a flashlight and walking straight into the dark. The call came at 6:37 in the morning. Not a text. Not an email. A direct call from a number I hadn't seen since the last executive holiday party. Back when Gavin was still pretending to be a visionary, and I was still pretending to like his signature cocktail. I let it ring 4 times before answering. Stefanie. Her voice was crisp. Controlled. Like someone slicing ribbon with a letter opener. She didn't bother with greetings. Didn't ask how I was. She didn't need to. We should talk, she said. I waited a beat. About what? Exactly. A pause. I could almost hear the pearls shift at her throat. Not over the phone. Of course not. Elena Whitcomb never said anything over a wire she wouldn't defend in court. She offered a time and a place. 10 o'clock. That morning. At a boutique hotel cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. The kind of place where wealthy retirees play bridge next to junior executives pretending to belong. I showed up at 10:03. On purpose. She was already seated. Black coffee untouched. Gloves folded neatly beside a copy of The Economist that I doubted she'd actually read. She didn't smile. Neither did I. "You're punctual," she said. "You're not," I replied. "You called 3 days too late." She didn't flinch, just folded her hands. Long fingers poised like a chess player waiting for her next move. "I've read the preliminary findings." I said nothing. "Gavin," she added, "is not prepared to run a lemonade stand," I said, and sipped my coffee. That earned the smallest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Maybe amusement, maybe regret, maybe just calculation. Elena never apologized. She measured, she tested, and right now, she was testing me to see how much I knew, how far I was willing to go, and whether or not I could still be useful. She wasn't here to beg. She was here to decide who the scalpel was. "Tell me, Stephanie," she said finally, eyes steady. "If it were you, what would you do next?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, let her feel it. Then I looked at her. Not as a subordinate, not even as an adversary, as a mirror. She'd never liked me. I was too sharp to pity, too clean to control, too competent to discard. We weren't friends. We weren't enemies. We were parallel predators, the kind that drink from the same watering hole but never turn their backs. I set my cup down gently. "I'd wait," I said, "and watch. See who you call after this." Her gaze didn't shift, but something behind her eyes moved. The calculation slowed. The mask cracked, just slightly. Then she said the one thing I didn't expect. "You were never his favorite," she said. "But you were always mine." And that was when I knew Gavin was finished. He just didn't know it yet. She had handed him the empire. And I had brought the match. Now she needed someone to hold the fire steady. Not to burn it all down, but to carve out what was worth saving. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. I left the cafe with no papers. No handshake. No deal. Just the quiet understanding between two women who knew exactly what it meant to hold a knife and choose where to cut. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt different this time. No name badge. No employee ID. Just a discreet envelope from Elena. Slipped under my door the night before. Inside was a reinstatement notice. Temporary executive oversight. Full authority granted. No red tape required. At the bottom, her initials. Nothing else. When the doors opened, the mood in the hallway was muted. Not quiet. Restrained. Like a room full of people trying not to be the first to scream. A security guard stood beside the frosted glass doors of the boardroom. He didn't ask for my name. He simply opened the door and stepped aside. Inside, 7 board members sat around the long walnut table. Each looked like they hadn't slept in days. At the head sat Elena. Flanked by 2 legal advisors and a thermos of untouched tea, she nodded once. "Thank you for coming." No mention of Gavin. No formal greeting. The presentation was already queued up. Dominic's audit findings projected on the screen behind her in stark, silent color. Each page was worse than the last. Unauthorized crypto transfers. Shell vendors with no deliverables. Reimbursement requests for luxury retreats that never happened. And then she turned to me. "We need stability," she said. "And speed. I'm asking you to step in, Not a question. A declaration. I glanced at the room. Saw the hesitation in their eyes. The fear. And I said the one word none of them expected. No. A beat of silence. Not unless I'm allowed to replace the furniture. I added, I'm not here to clean up his mess with a paper towel. If I come back, it's on my terms. One board member chuckled under his breath, then tried to disguise it with a cough. Another, Harold, who always smelled faintly of pipe smoke and quarterly losses, leaned forward. We'll authorize full operational authority, he said. That was all I needed. I stepped forward, took the remote, and pulled up a folder I had brought myself. Before we begin, I said, I have one more case to add to the review. The screen changed. A slide appeared. Case identifier Gulf Whiskey 0, on in 90. Amount $58,000. Payout shell vendor named Centric Strategies. Recipient unknown. Routing number obscured. I turned back to the board. This payment was flagged but scrubbed of traceable data. However, preliminary findings link it to a personal account. I paused. Not Gavin's. Now the room stirred. Heads turned. Eyes narrowed. It links to someone at this table. And just like that, the silence shifted from tension to dread. Then the doors flew open. Gavin stormed in. Red-faced. Eyes wild. A junior intern trailed behind him, looking like he wanted to evaporate. What the hell is going on, he barked. Why am I not on this calendar? Why is she standing there like she's in charge? I turned to him. Slowly. Deliberately. And held up the badge Elena had reinstated. Executive oversight. Because I can. I said. And I did. He opened his mouth to argue. But I raised my hand. There's one more thing, I said. I walked to the table, pulled a sheet of paper from my folder, and laid it flat. It was yellowed slightly at the edges, signed in ink by William Whitcomb himself. Clause 17E, I said. It granted any executive with over 10 years of service and a direct link to financial compliance the authority to freeze all executive operations in the event of imminent financial harm. Supported by audit findings. Elena's voice came in like glass. And it holds. She didn't even look at Gavin. Effective immediately. Gavin Whitcomb is suspended from all company operations. No shouting. No security guards. Just legal precision, and a door swinging shut. The room was silent as Gavin walked out. He didn't look back. No one stopped him. No one offered a word of defense or pity. The badge scanner clicked. The compliance officer handed him an envelope. And just like that, the nameplate on the door became a memory. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned toward the table, and the seat Elena had vacated. I didn't ask. I didn't hesitate. I took it. Not beside her. In her place, for the first time in 18 years, I sat at the head of the table, not as someone supporting the vision, but as the one setting it. The lights dimmed slightly as the presentation resumed, casting a red glow across the rows of spreadsheets and flagged transactions. Each slide was a scar. H number. A warning. And I went through them like a surgeon in triage. Methodical. Detached. Unsentimental. There was no room for shock now. Just action. This wasn't revenge. This was repair. The company I had helped build, the one Gavin had gutted with fake vendors, luxury retreats, and empty slogans, still had a pulse. Barely. But it was there. We have 2 weeks, I said. 2 weeks before shareholders start asking questions no one can afford to answer wrong. The board nodded. No resistance. No debate. They weren't looking for a hero. They were looking for someone who could read the numbers and not blink. And I'd been doing that since day one. Someone asked what came next. I didn't respond immediately. I clicked into the company's financial backend. The familiar layout. The folders I had once organized myself. Access had already been restored. Elena hadn't wasted time. I hovered over the first file, Internal Discretionary Fund Approvals, and clicked open. And then, I smiled. Not because Gavin was gone, but because I was in. Because the damage he caused wasn't just financial. It was cultural. He'd made arrogance a policy. He'd buried accountability under buzzwords. And now, every forgotten invoice, every blurred signature, every suspiciously vague reimbursement was mine to excavate. This wasn't about getting even. This was about getting it right. About reminding people what real leadership looks like. Not the kind that holds a mic at brunch, but the kind that sits in silence and makes the hard calls. I looked around the room. They weren't loyal to me. Not yet. They were afraid of collapse. They wanted control. What they didn't realize is that they'd just handed it to the one person who never wanted the spotlight. Just the truth. I'm not here to be quiet, I said. I'm here to be precise. Elena stood slowly. She didn't offer applause. Didn't say thank you. She just gave me a long, measured look. The kind one chess master gives another when the game has changed. Fix it, she said. Or finish it. Then she walked out. Coat draped over her arm like a general exiting the battlefield. And me, I stayed. Alone with the numbers. The fire. The silence. Somewhere in the distance. A headline was being written. Blogs were buzzing. Forums speculating. But inside this room, where the damage had been done, the rebuild had already begun. The revenge, that part was over. Now came the audit, and I would make sure every page, every cent, every crack in the foundation Gavin left behind would be accounted for.